So my presentation, I'm going to keep it brief. I will be talking about the importance of getting into predicting conflicts in Sri Lanka, specifically climate conflict. We are seeing climate conflict all over the world, and it is not far from Sri Lanka, and that is what my study has been about. And I'm going to look specifically at the context of climate change, because lo and behold, it is very much here. A lot of people keep saying it's 100 years away, but we are experiencing it right now. So we just want to keep talking about it and keep preparing ourselves for the inevitable. So I'm looking at the North Central province within the context of droughts. For those who might not be very familiar with the technicalities of climate change, two things can happen. The main two things are you increase in floods and increase in droughts. And Sri Lanka is predicted in a way where the wet zone will get wetter and we'll have more droughts, and the dry zone will get drier. So North Central province is situated in the dry zone, and we are going to see there are enough reasons for us to believe that this is going to be a problem. I'm sure most of you all might remember in 2017 we had a massive drought in the dry zone where 1 million households in Sri Lanka were affected. 58% of the entire farmer community in Sri Lanka lost their livelihoods. And in the North Central province, 90% of agriculture, water for agriculture comes from tanks, and our tanks dried up. Sri Lanka has 3,300 tanks. You all know the hydraulic civilization, you all know the tank system. Out of the 3,300 at the moment, only 1,500 are maintained to some extent by the government because it's very expensive to maintain tanks. And during the 2017 flood, 3,000 of them were dried up. So the whole of that area was running on 300 tanks. So 2017 for us was kind of a snapshot of where we could be if droughts aren't managed. So this is an example of one such drought in Anuradhapura, and 80% tanks are vulnerable to rapid evaporation. So I'm not going to go on too much about the doom and gloom of what the consequences of droughts are, but please do keep that at the back of your mind because that is our reality, and we are going to have to figure out how to move ahead with that. So climate conflict, again, one reason that I thought of talking about it in Sri Lanka's context is because massive wars, you would have heard of Darfur, Sudan, and also a lot of conflicts at the moment, believe it or not, the root cause is farmers who have been disadvantaged because of climate change and their lack of access to resources. But scientists who study these models over and over again say that the problem is not really that the water has dried up, but how the government institutions manage water scarcity. So then, we turn to Sri Lanka. Oh dear, the Sri Lankan government is now been given the task. International models say, if Sri Lanka is to kind of navigate the issue of water scarcity, your governance institutions are supposed to be able to manage this. So, we have the question, is Sri Lanka ready to do that? And what does that look like for us? So I asked 3 questions, right? Now my question is, in the midst of all this, what are the chances of farmers who are actually going to be the primary victims of this issue in the North Central province? How are they what kind of issues are they going to fall into, and what are the chances of them getting into conflict? Because as I was saying, in Darfur and all, it's all the farmers who got into conflict. Climate conflict, actually a lot of it is initiated by farmers. And in Sri Lanka, as you all know, around 30% of the population is actually still the farming community. So I'm trying to understand conflict prediction, specifically in the farming community. So these are I'm going to just explain this in very simple words. Question 1, what does it look like for the farmers? Does it look like there's a chance for them to get into conflict? Question 2, what do these farmers think of water governance institutions? Because as the models show, if the farmers in Sri Lanka are unhappy with water governance institutions, that's a motive for them to rebel against the government. And question 3, okay, if the farmers are going to fight, who are they going to fight against? Is it the government, or are they going to fight each other? So that's, in very simple terms, my questions. And I've put the frameworks here, but it's very, very simple. There's a brilliant researcher in climate conflict in the Netherlands, School. She has put all of these things into a beautiful framework, and she has said, you know what? It's very simple. If there's prolonged drought, it's going to just add to the accumulation of grievances in farmers. It could be existing grievances, it could be the monetary losses that they gain, and all these grievances would actually push them into conflict. But my question was, and one of the limitations was, she hasn't said at which point these grievances actually boil up to push a farmer into conflict. So I used 3 theories that are tested to say that, look, when these certain principles are violated, it pushes a community into conflict. So I used the human security framework. Again, I'm not going to get technical into this, but human security framework to understand, okay, if the farmers are having this many grievances, what kind of grievances are they having, and are they severe enough for them to get into conflict? 2, I looked at the structural violence theory to understand, okay, if the farmers have a problem with the government, do they really see the government as an enemy? I'm just being very explaining this in the simplest way possible. And the 3rd is to try to figure out who they are going to actually rebel against. Do farmers have the capacity to rebel against the government, especially the government of Sri Lanka? Or who are they going to be rebelling against other groups? So quickly to take you through my findings, there is significant evidence to say that even before the advent of climate change, Sri Lankan farmers have enough issues to push them into conflict. And now please do bear in mind and bear with me, because I wrote this paper before any of the farmer fertilizer issues, before any of the rebellion actually happened. So this was around mid-2020. And even at that time, before climate change has hit us, before ad hoc agricultural policies came in, the farmers already had enough reasons to want to rebel. So the human security framework, if you're not aware of it, says that human security is not just about military or national security. There's food security, environment security, health security, and 7 such dimensions. And farmers in the northern province, people don't talk about this much, but they have an undiagnosed and the government doesn't even address the chronic kidney disease issues that they've been having for actually more than 20 years, completely taken for granted. And another thing, I'm not sure how many of you might know, but there are development policies actually in the North Central province that allows the government to go and bulldoze farming lands, their houses, and take them into government custody. Why? Because all these farmers, actually 85% of farmers, are given land based on a 99-year lease from the government, which means at any time when the lease is up, the government can say, hey, you know what, we are not going to extend your lease, give us the land back. So in recent times, because of very rapid development policies, the government, you all would have seen this in the news, I'm sure, the government has been going up to these people saying, you know what, okay, y'all have been here for about 3 generations, that doesn't matter, the lease is over, and overnight they bulldoze everything that they have invested in, right? And there are farming families that find themselves relocated to jungles overnight, saying start over. And there is so much tension that nobody talks about, especially the farming community. So given this, and also from 2017 experience, we know that if a drought hits in Sri Lanka, farmers are going to have serious issues, because in Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa, they have the highest loss of livelihood. They don't have water, they can't farm, and also these houses get into loans. So that's a whole bunch of other problems altogether. Then, what do the farmers think about the governance system? There's absolutely no surprise there. Farmers do assume that the government policies are discriminatory against them, and the farmers are extremely frustrated. One example is that, I interviewed a whole bunch of water activists and farmers, and if I can give you an example, so the government apparently says, look, there is no water for you to farm. Why? Because there are tanks that they have reserved for helicopters to land. So, the farmers are now asking the question, what is more important to you, your helicopter landing, or, the entire income of, imagine the number of families that will be growing with the use of one tank. So, there are multiple examples, but the farmers in general are not happy with how water governance works. Now, the final part, and this is my doom and gloom message, just kidding, but conflict prediction. Now, all this tension is building up in farmers. Who are they going to fight against? In horizontal inequalities theory. Please bear with me while I take you through this theory. Vertical theory means, vertical inequalities means that all these farmers, this entire group of people, perceive themselves to be disadvantaged based on their income. Right? So regardless of which group they belong to, regardless of if they're Buddhist, Muslim, Sinhala, Tamil, they still see themselves as farmers of the North Central province who are disadvantaged by income. And in the horizontal theory, it would mean where they don't see each other as farmers. Now they're going to start seeing each other as either Sinhalese farmers or Muslim farmers. So the question is, at the moment though, when I did my interviews, the farmers didn't see any racism from the side of the government. Sinhalese farmers and Muslim farmers alike said, you know what, the government is giving us water. They're not looking at the race issue at the moment. They're not discriminating us at the moment. So the question arises, and this is where my main point is, is there space at this point for politicization and manipulation of water resources? Because as you know, Sri Lanka is the easiest place to start conflicts along a group setting, and we have seen that for so many decades. So the question is, in a moment like this, can an opportunistic party go and tell the Sinhalese or the Muslims, hey, y'all are in competition with each other for water? In Anuradhapura, 91% of the population is Buddhist, 8% Muslim, and 1% other. So it's technically it could become a very tense situation. Because for example, if someone says, hey, look, the 3,000 tanks, that's part of Sinhalese legacy. That was built by the Sinhalese kings. This is part of your cultural heritage. The Muslim community is going to have to stand against that kind of argument. And the thing is, so in my final point, and I don't know how much time I've taken, even though I'm in the organizing committee, oh dear. My final point is, we have seen an example of politicization of water in Sri Lanka already. During the Yahapalana government, there was a water diversion project from Kilinochchi to Jaffna, because Kilinochchi was having an abundance of water, and as you all know, Jaffna water tables are drying up, so there was an initiative to divert water. But the politicians in Kilinochchi made a fuss, didn't let it happen at that time, and the subtle nuances of their argument was along the lines of caste. Why should, as you know, different districts in the northern province do have different caste identities. So the politicians in Kilinochchi have subtly asked, why should we give our water to a group of another caste? And this wasn't out in public, of course, but I interviewed people from the area. And that just goes to show that our resources, especially water, could get politicized, and it could turn into an ethnic or any group identity issue if we leave this unaddressed. So in closing, we have a couple of policy questions. We might have our climate change policy, we might have our national reconciliation policy, but if you're a country that's going to accept and see climate change as such a reality of what is to come, how much are we doing to make sure that these policies are integrated together? The climate change policy does not talk about climate conflict. The national reconciliation policy does not talk about conflict prediction. How much of our development policies are actually hurting our people? There's a policymakers versus the actual people who live with those policies, and how much are we thinking about that, and also how much are we thinking about the politicization of water. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope that wasn't too long. Thanks a lot.